Yeah, no worries, man. It's a pleasure to be here on your show, man. I appreciate it. It's a good opportunity to tell my story about what it's like to be a whistleblower, a federal whistleblower at that. And I think there's a lot of people out there in the world that have a story to tell. And just so you and your audience know, this is also the first opportunity for me to do my first podcast on what's going to be my new program, The Whistleblower. And and I'm looking forward to, at the same time, hearing stories from other people who have had their experience with being a federal or state or some type of whistleblower. As long as you've gone out there and presented your case to the state, trying to improve the lives of people who have been harmed by a circumstance or have been killed by a circumstance or a company or a product, I want to hear your story. So I want to thank you, Kevin, for giving me the opportunity to talk about what I went through with Purdue Pharma, being an Oxycontin sales rep, and the disappointing things that we went through, the victories that we had, and it was a tough story. So just to give you a little background, my name's Steve May. I started with Purdue Pharma back in 1999. At the time, I was several years out of college. I had spent the previous year and a half working for another pharmaceutical company, and basically a recruiter reached out to me, and I had the opportunity to meet who became the man who became my boss immediately was Mark Radcliffe. And you're going to hear me talk about Mark Radcliffe a lot during this conversation, because he wasn't only my boss, but he was also the first whistleblower that actually brought this case to the federal court system before I did. And he was instrumental in this. And we ended up, between my case, which was combined with his wife, Angela Radcliffe, and his original case, we went through a lot together in finding out what it was exactly that Purdue was doing, what they were trying to cover up, the false claims that they were making as a company. And we worked on that for many years together. And ultimately, we lost the war, but there was a lot of battles won during this experience. And in doing so, I got to see firsthand, through discovery, what the corruption that goes on behind the scenes, not only at the pharmaceutical company, but I also believe at the FDA level itself. And quite frankly, I think the federal government, Department of Justice, was not too keen on taking this case. And because there's so much invested by the FDA, by the companies, they had their own case going on at the cases going on at the same time against Purdue. So why did they need Mark Radcliffe, Angela Radcliffe, and Steve Mays, Keaton whistleblower case? Why did they need it? I don't know. Um,
Let's take a step back.
and so
I think a lot of
yeah, sure
people
thing.
don't really for, I mean, for those people who are plugged in, I think they know of Oxycontin, they know of Purdue,
Mhm.
but let's take a step back because I guess the reason why I reached out to you in the first place is because, well, I live in LA. I guess, where do you live again? Where do you live
Well,
again?
I currently live in Maryland, but at the time I was the sales representative for Purdue in southwestern Virginia, aka parts of Appalachia, and it was within my territory and within our region as a team of representatives. It was within our territory and our region that the opioid crisis truly started. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, so didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Okay. So Steve, I can tell you're like really anxious, and you're
Mhm.
like, all this information is really good, but let's just try to like calm down and have like a normal conversation, right? Because I
Okay.
feel like you have a lot to say, and trust me, I have a lot of time spared for you. I feel like we could talk for a few hours. So
Yeah, I agree.
uh, I guess let's take the steps a step back because I don't think a lot of people really even understand who Purdue is, Oxycontin. I don't even
Mhm.
honestly, I don't think they know who you are. So I think we need to
Mhm.
start at the top a little bit and like really understand who you are, why this is important in the first place. And if I'm being honest, the reason why I reached out to you in the first place is because, like I said, I live in LA, and with that, the really why that matters, and it doesn't really matter, but one of the things that's going on in LA is obviously we have massive homeless problem, right? Just like a lot of other big cities, a growing homeless problem. And a lot of that is due to a lot of a variety of factors, but one of that is addiction, right? Addiction to
Mhm.
drugs. I think if you trace back a lot of these addiction problems, it's mostly opiates. And if you trace it back, it's mostly because it was an over prescription of these drugs, right? Opiates. So if we could take a step back, I mean, yeah, can you tell the audience again who you are, like who you are, and guess when you started working for Purdue again, if you don't mind? I'm gonna end
Yeah,
up,
no worries.
but yeah, if you could just like retell us, like, so you got out of college, a recruiter reached out to you. How old were you again when
Well,
Purdue reached out?
actually, it's quite ironic. I before right out of college, I was a police officer,
So,
in Virginia, and so that was my first 3 years of true life experience. After that,
how
I
do you
had
go from cop to pharmaceutical salesman? Well, what's
no, from cop to drug dealer. That's what I like to say it.
okay? So
I
you
went
switched
from
sides. Got it. Okay.
yeah, I switched sides. I figure if I couldn't beat the drug dealers, I'd join them.
Yeah. Okay. So how did that come about? That's a very weird career path.
Well, actually, I had a neighbor at the time where I was living that was working for a pharmaceutical company, so he helped me get a job with his pharmaceutical company. I wanted to have the opportunity to expand my financial horizons, if you know what I'm saying, from being a street cop.
Well, I mean,
So
I feel like if you do things the right way as a cop, there is a lot of money to make. And by I say the right way, the right things to do as a cop, it's a lot of bad things probably, but there's a lot of money to be made in it, a lot, I imagine.
oh yeah, I mean, no, I love being in law enforcement. It's just that um, I've made some decisions in life. I had actually a big impactful decision was when one of my friends was and colleagues was ambushed and killed, and that kind of set me on a new mindset in life and what I want to do, what I want to do as a family. So when this opportunity came about with my friend's pharmaceutical company, I took the opportunity and joined it and got the job with them. And it was about a year and a half after that that the recruiter for Purdue Pharma found me
What was the
and
first job?
introduced.
What was it? Were you selling like a similar medication, like something in?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was selling the same a similar medication in the same class. It was Vicoprofen, which was a hydrocodone ibuprofen combination product, and I was marketing that product throughout southwestern Virginia.
Gotcha. And when this recruiter reached out to you, what was that process like? I guess what
Man, I'm
was
glad you asked
the hiring
because
process like? Can you tell me what that was like?
yeah, so Purdue is a special company at the time. This is 1999, 2000. They were known at the time as being one of the highest paying pharmaceutical companies in the industry. Um, and that was one of the things that the recruiter really put out there as on the fishing line. Hey, look, this is a great paying company.
Do you remember
They're
the
the
pay?
top.
Do you remember
Do I
what
remember? I'm
do you
sorry.
remember what, like, do you remember what kinda numbers they were throwing out to you at the time when it came to, like, pay, what you could be making, right?
I remember specifically them telling me that the rep that I was replacing in this particular territory was averaging around 35 to 40 grand a quarter in
Instant
commissions,
commissions, right.
and that was on top of a salary at the time, which is about $70,000 to $80,000.
Shit.
I don't know what his salary was. He'd been with the
So
company about 4 or 5 years.
so
Yeah.
back then, a salary of what? 200, let's say 250.
Let's say a salary of 70 to 80,000. And in his territory before I joined the company, if he was averaging 30 grand a month, I'm sorry, 30 grand a quarter. So another 120 on top of that. So yeah, I would put it right around 200, 250.
This is back then
Um,
too. This is 1999, you said?
99. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I was hardly thinking about money at the time. I was still pretty young, but that's a pretty penny. I mean, you look at it with inflation, that you'd be making a lot of money in today's dollar amount.
Yeah, and from where I was coming, I mean, that immediately was, about a 60% improvement over where I was at the previous company, which was actually at the same time going through a merger and acquisition with Abbott Labs. So that company ended up getting dissolved anyway. So it was a good transition. So I was staying in the opioid market, you know, and at the time, 1999, the opioid crisis really didn't start rearing its head yet. It didn't until I felt like it did start becoming a crisis until after I joined the company.
Till you join
And
the
at the,
team.
I'm not kidding you. I joined the company in November of '99. Went to training in December, and in January, when you go out in the field, you got another rep riding with you to help, have conversations with doctors and such. And I'll never forget this other rep who at the time was the reigning national rep of the year out of Ohio. She came and rode with me, and we went to on a doctor call in. Um,
This is when you're already at Purdue.
I'm at Purdue. This is my first month in the field
Okay.
at Purdue in January of
Telling
2000.
Can you finish telling me what the rest of the recruiting process was like, if you don't mind me? We can get back in a second.
Yeah, so basically, the recruiter told me about the job. I went and I met Mark Ratcliffe, who became my hiring manager, and we had a really good conversation. We I felt like we really connected, and then I went and met his regional manager. Um, that didn't go over too well that day. I remember because Mark told me that he decided to go with another rep, and I was pretty bummed out about that. I don't know what happened, but a few days later, he calls and says that, "Hey, something happened with that other rep. Are you still interested in the job?" So I ended up joining. So, other than going through a normal interview process, it wasn't anything extraordinary from my experience at the time. It was just meeting the local sales manager and then the regional sales manager.
Gotcha.
And then once I accepted the job, I went to training, which was three weeks up in Norwalk, Connecticut,
Okay.
before they had their new Stamford, Connecticut headquarters.
3 weeks training, you said?
3 weeks training, yeah.
Okay. What was that training like?
Um, excuse me. What was that training like? It was pretty intense, actually. So there was about 20, 25 people in the class, all coming from other pharmaceutical companies. Now, at the time, Purdue had a methodology that they only hired people from who, number one, were coming from other pharmaceutical companies, and number two, they had to be in the top 10 ranking in their current company. So I met I met both of those criteria. It's pretty intense because it was a suit and tie atmosphere at Purdue. It was training started at bright and early. I think 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and we went on through the afternoon. Dinner was spent together as a company. If I remember correctly, we were going out as a team almost every night during that time. And then, we were tested and we were expected to have complete knowledge of not only the product, the competing products, and sorry, and all of the in the market itself. So it was pretty intense.
Who were the competing products at the time? I guess, I don't remember. I wasn't
so
prescription drugs for fun or anything at that time.
so at the time we had basically you had your short acting opioid analgesics, which is your Vicodin and Percocet, and those products were every 4 to 6 hours.
Honestly, I just wanted to understand the training a little bit, how intensive it was. I guess, well, what kind of training was involved, but I think you covered most of it. I mean, unless there's anything in particular you want to cover again.
No, it's just that it was intense training. It was suit and tie atmosphere. We started early in the morning, late in the afternoon. You're during training, you're also competing to be, the top of your class as well. So there was the pressure there, but really the training focused on the product, the market knowledge, the disease states that we're trying to treat, the product knowledge of Oxycontin, and then the product knowledge of our competing products. So, and some of those competing products, for example, were drugs like Vicodin, Vicoprofen, um, which are hydrocodone project products, and then your Percocet, Percodan, short acting drugs. And at the time, what was happening was really important for Purdue was their patent on MS Contin, which was long acting morphine, was expiring. Now they have this patent on OxyContin, and they had a business to protect, because with the onset of MS Contin generic, well, now the company is going to have to compete with some other generic companies. And then there was really one other major product out there called Dilaudid, and that was a long acting fentanyl patch.
Yeah,
So those are the things that we had to know about.
gotcha. But as you were going back to MS Cotton, were their previous drug coming off patent, soon going to be facing a lot of competition from generics. So now OxyContin is invented, right? I guess that was invented right, how long before you joined the team?
I think it was invented either in the late 80s or the early 90s in terms of the invention. Basically, they took a long acting delivery system of another product, improved upon it, because you had the Acrocontin system. Oh man, now I'm going back to my product knowledge, but they were known for the long acting morphine, and they also had long acting theophylline in their product line as well. And so basically, they had this technology that would allow the drug to be distributed, through the body, over a period of, depending on the products. I mean, the theophylline is over a period of 24 hours, but for MS Contin it was 8 to 12 hours, and for OxyContin it was 12 hours. So they had that. It was in development, and I think in 1996 is when the product officially came to market.
Okay. So it had been on the product, it had been on the market for a little bit, and then you guys started selling it. I guess. Okay, so you start selling the drug. Um, how? I guess what your territory is? What the Appalachians? You said West Virginia.
Yeah, so I was based out of well, my territory was basically Roanoke, Virginia, going west. And for those that don't know, that is southwestern Virginia, and that is a section of the state that is just below West Virginia. So parts of my territory were in southwestern Virginia, and parts of my territory were in southern West Virginia.
Well,
And so,
you must have killed it, Steve, because it
yeah,
seems like a lot of the documentaries that I see, for whatever reason, uh, a lot of them seem to have footage and content from that region of the world for whatever reason.
yes, yeah,
Is there a
there's
reason why that area has, I guess, I don't know, high rate of addiction or high usage of prescription medication? I guess.
there was a higher usage of prescription medication in that area versus other parts of the state, because you know let me tell a really quick story real quick of to paint the picture of what it was like in that part of the country. When I right after I got out of training, I went to out into the field with another field training rep who was at the time the reigning national sales rep of the year for Purdue. And she came to ride with me. In that day, the couple of days that we worked together, we spent time in southern West Virginia. And I'll never forget, I think it was our very second call of my time together with her. And we go into a doctor's office, and the doctor comes out. She sees us. We introduce ourselves, and she goes, "Go ahead, sit in my office for a minute." So we sit down in her office, and she comes in a moment later. She goes, "I want you to know that this past weekend, my niece passed away as a result of an overdose of OxyContin. I won't be prescribing your product anymore." You know,
Was
And
that
that
the
just
first
shocked us.
wow. That's,
So,
was that, like, the first time
so
that you've heard of anything negative happening with those drugs? Or
yeah, I mean, coming out of training, you're trained that this long-acting delivery mechanism of the drug was, and this is the words that were actually in the package insert, the long acting, and I might butcher it a little bit, but the long acting delivery mechanism of Oxycontin is believed to reduce the abuse liability of the drug. That was in the package insert, which was subsequently removed from the package insert years later. But that was something I had memorized. And so, we were trained, oh no, the chances of abusing Oxycontin was going to be less because it's got this long acting delivery mechanism. But what you don't take into account, or the company wasn't taking into account at the time, was that if you crush up the product and you take it, or you melt it down and you take it as an IV, but if you crush it up and snort it or take it some other way, you've just taken that long acting mechanism and you now have given yourself a fast acting drug. And if you inject it, it's an ultra fast acting drug. So going back to your question about seeing,
like a
the
glass heroin
documentaries of,
for those that aren't aware of the drug. It's,
it's
morphine.
like heroin.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like heroin. I guess
So
how many
if I
milligrams
could say,
or is it how many milligrams are
mm,
in a pill?
so at the time we had 20, 40, I'm sorry, 10, 20, 40, and 80 milligrams. Okay. So 80 milligrams, if a Percocet is 5 milligrams, so they also had a 7.5 and they had a 10. That's a lot of Percocet. The reason why you would never take 6 or 8 Percocet at the time is because it's got acetaminophen in it, and that acetaminophen will kill your liver. But going back to your question about the area of the country and its abuse and such, yeah, people in that part of the state were abusing more. They were abusing the prescription drugs, and in fact, it wasn't too much longer after that experience. And I'm new to Purdue. This doctor tells us that her niece died. Um, you know, we went, I mean, we were totally shocked about that. That rep who had been with the company for 4 or 5 years at the point was shocked to hear that. I remember a few months later contacting my old supervisor from the police department that I worked at, who was at the time the chief of police of that. No, he wasn't chief of police yet. He was a captain, but he eventually became chief of police of that department. I called him up and I said, "Hey, I'm curious to know what you guys are seeing in terms of OxyContin abuse out in your part of the state, because where I was a police officer was in Hampton, Virginia, which is the far opposite side end of the state." And he goes, "No, we're not seeing any of it." So
So, okay, so
it.
you hear about this death, I guess. What
Mhm.
is there protocol for that? I guess what do you just Slack your team? I guess you didn't have Slack back in the day. I guess, like, what's the protocol? What do you
No, so there is a protocol. Whenever there's an adverse event, we had to report it to the company. The doctor, the circumstance, the information that we got, we report it to the company, and then it was their responsibility at that point to look into that adverse event, whether or not it was
I guess who do you report it to?
due.
Is there, like, a general mailbox or something? Or, like,
Yeah, there was.
you
I don't remember exactly what it was like. If it was an email within the company that we sent it to, or I think that's how it was. There was a form that we had to submit, but yeah, we've submitted it because we were all shocked by it.
I guess the thing that sucks about outside sales or whatever is, like, you're not in an office. Oh, I guess were you in an office ever? Or are you, like, outside completely on the road? Do you guys ever get into a headquarters or into an office and talk about this together? Or are you guys completely
Great questions. No, as independent, I'm not. We weren't independent. We were working for the company. As field representatives, we were out basically. We have a company car. We go out in the morning. At Purdue, we were expected to see our first clinician by 8 a.m. and our last clinician by 5 p.m. So from between 8 and 5 p.m., we're in our car going from doctor's office to hospital to pharmacy.
So you're
So
not really talking to your colleagues about like today, if something happened like that in an office today,
Mhm.
you could, get in, chat with all of your teammates. It'd be all over the place.
Well,
There'd be memes about this
right.
already,
The other The other thing that we had at the time was voicemail. That was a huge thing where we just call into an 800 number, we leave a voicemail for our entire team, and we tell the story. So we can leave a voicemail for just our manager or for the entire team. And I think in addition to sending the email or whatever the form was that we submitted for that adverse event reporting, we also, submitted it to our manager through the voicemail system. So that's how we communicated. And then once every, I think it was 2 months at the time, or maybe once a quarter, as a team of sales reps, which is typically 9 to 12 people, we would get together face to face for a couple of days of training.
like a
Um,
QBR or something like that.
yeah, exactly, with our sales manager and such.
Exactly. So
So
how does that work? Because if sorry, I can't help but think. So all of this is happening. People are dying. Or people are addicted. Everyone's separated though. Everyone's completely like, isolated. It seems like no one's really sharing their stories. Like you get to these QBRs. I don't know where they are. I'm guessing they're at nice resorts or you know some hotel, something like that. Some nice conference room.
typically at a hotel. I mean, um, we had reps from Ohio, West Virginia, parts of Tennessee, and southwestern Virginia in our region, not region, but district, I should say. And so we met at a resort in Beckley, just outside of Beckley, West Virginia. So yeah, we would get together, and when we got together, we'd be like, "Yeah, my doctor told me about this situation too," and yeah, that's
Oh,
doctors are complaints.
so what was
So
that?
at that
So,
time,
okay, so you're at this place. I guess you tell your story to your colleagues, right, of this happening, and that's when you start to find out that other people are experiencing something similar?
well, it's not just then that we're finding out that other people are facing it. Word was getting out amongst us that we were having that. I mean, I think that call with that doctor in Lewisburg kind of hit a little closer to home because it was so new to me. You hate for something like that to happen. And it's a blow because, for the previous month, all I had heard about Oxycontin and Purdue is the greatest drug since sliced bread. It was going to change lives, relieve people's pain. So really, when we would go and go to the training with whether it was with our district or regional training or national training typically took place twice, 2 or 3 times a year, depending on the circumstances. But when you go to those other training, it was to help teach us and to corroborate with management, how are we to handle situations like this. you know when a doctor says, I'm not prescribing your drug because I'm having too many people divert it, or I'm having too many people abuse it, how do we as reps push back on that message and divert their attention from the bad users and say, well, doctor, think about your good patients that need pain relief. So that's how we were being trained at the time to deal with that type of scenario.
Wow, okay. So tell me tell me about the time that you met Richard Sackler.
I met him a couple times face to face. Ironically, it was so my training event was at the end of the year. And so the last week of our training in December happened to be the night of a big. They brought in all of the district managers and all the regional managers from around the country for a big end of the year event, and it so happened to be. I don't know, but not by people sit at dinner tables. This was at a steakhouse near or in um, uh, Norwalk, Connecticut. So we sit down. just out of circumstance. I don't know how, but I ended up at the same table with Richard Sackler and a couple of the other executives. I remember specifically Jim Lang being at the table as well. So, I'm
Who's
brand new with the company, been with them for 2 weeks. So I'm there to listen,
who's
you
Jim?
know.
Who's Jim Lang?
Jim Lang was the vice president, was the national vice president of sales at the time.
Okay, gotcha. So Sackler, out of all of the people to sit with at this,
I'm with the table with Jim Lang and Richard Sackler.
you're
It
at
was weird.
this table. That's
Yeah,
crazy enough. It's like awesome. That's a great story, but at the same time, it's like, I got to be on my best behavior. It kind of sounds like a shitty dinner in a way.
little,
Uh,
little intimidating at the same time. You're brand new at the company. You don't want to mess it up, right?
yeah, yeah. And this guy at the time, he's someone you're at the time before all of this stuff. He's someone you kind of look up to, I imagine.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at a circumstance like that and you watch the speeches going on that night and you go, hey, look, 10, 15, 20 years from now, this is where I want to be sitting, That's the position I want to have with the company.
Yeah,
Because, at the time, Purdue was known as a company that people stayed with for a long time. There was a lot of reps that had moved up through management and had been with the company for 15, 20, 25, 30 years. So that was pretty prestigious.
people do stick with Purdue for a long time. It's just a lot of the times they're end users. They stick with the
Mm.
Oxycontin. Um, it's just kind of funny that out of the entire place, I'm guessing tons of. I guess it's mostly the sales team that's at that place, right? At that convention.
Actually, at that particular dinner, it was just my sales training class, which was about, like I said, 20, 25 people or so.
Mhm.
And then because it was the end of the year banquet, they had brought in, really all of the leaders throughout the country. So all of the sales managers, whether they were a district or regional sales managers, were brought to this dinner. So I think, and then you've got the training department. You probably had some other people within the administration department. So this was a good big end of the year thing. And I think if I remember correctly, executives were spreading out and eating with the folks, you know.
Yeah.
So it wasn't unusual, So maybe Michael Friedman, who I think was the president at the time, forget what his actual title was at the time, but Michael Friedman, he might have been sitting at another table with another, you know, beginner rep and sales manager and such. So it wouldn't be unusual in that circumstance.
Okay, so tell me more about the sales culture. So you're in this place. I guess now that you're inside, how much money are you hearing about people making? How much people are making inside?
Well, so quarterly we would find out. It was a big thing. I mean, Purdue really prided itself on being the highest paid or one of the highest paid pharmaceutical companies in the industry. So I remember hearing stories within my first year of representatives making upwards of 60, 80 typically was I think a top third rep in the country would be making um, maybe 60 to 80, maybe 50 to $80,000 a quarter.
Wow.
Your top 10% probably in the 80 to 120 range at that time between, let's say, 2000 and 20, the end of 2021. At the time when I joined the company, my territory was in the top 10% in the company.
Your
And I
territory being
do
top 10%.
my territory, the previous rep was consistently in the top 10%, you
Okay.
know?
So you
And
have
so
a
I know
small
his.
territory is what I'm hearing. Lots of prescription usage. I mean, I guess that's good for you, right? I mean, I guess are you inheriting those accounts
Oh
or
yeah, everything. Yeah, I went in the territory. The other rep that was in my territory at the time, he moved on to a different division within the company. completely different product line. And so I took over his rep. I mean, his territory. Basically, my job was to continue to see the same number of prescriptions and grow the territory.
Gotcha.
So Purdue was highly incentivizing the reps for growth. There was, what they would do is they would, if you had a territory, let's say, that covered a significant portion of a state, with X number of population, then all of a sudden you get to a certain point in the growth of that territory. They would take your territory and cut it in half and split it with you and another rep. Now you got to grow that smaller territory even more. And then they would split it and grow more. So that was a normal thing at the time. So not only was the territory that I entered being done by another rep, it had just been split, and now there's two reps handling the same territory that the previous rep did, you know? And the idea in business works. If you get to a certain point in growth, you split it, you take these accounts, the other person take these accounts, start growing those. Yeah, they had a really good business model, and it worked for growth.
Were you guys growing consistently quarter over quarter?
Oh yeah, as a company, I mean, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think they were above $1 billion a year annually for the whole company. And I don't remember when they hit the $2 billion point. I think it was in late 2000 or 2021. Don't remember the exact, but it was a big deal. So there was constant growth happening throughout the country at the time,
What was
except
sorry?
except in southwestern Virginia, my territory. It was actually quite funny. Not too long after I joined the company, they basically say, okay, you're not really responsible for the numbers, the quarterly numbers from the fourth quarter of 2019, and you're not really responsible for the numbers in the first quarter of 2020. But they start seeing you as being responsible for the numbers in the second, third, and fourth quarter of 2020. Well, about the same time that I had been with the company, the good old Roanoke Times in Roanoke, Virginia, which is where I was living at the time, started publishing all of these negative newspaper articles about OxyContin, the abuse of OxyContin in the area. And so that
How
really
did that make you feel, I guess, reading all that?
it concerned me because I'm, coming from my law enforcement background, I hated to see it, you know. I hated to see what was happening in the community. Um, at the same time, I had an obligation and really bought into the concept. Hey, we're really treating pain. We're really trying to help people. Um, and maybe it was the constant psyop that we or psychological psyop, psychological operations that the company would put on us. You really I mean, at least for me, I really believed in the cause of reducing pain in people's lives.
What kind
So
of
how do we do that without it adversely impacting the community? You know,
what kind of psyops do you mean? What kind of
I mean, just the
what
constant barrage of training. Oh, if your doctor says that my patients are abusing, that, well, switch the conversation and get them to focus on the good patients that aren't abusing, that really need pain relief.
hmm.
Being a little facetious in my answer here, but that's
That's interesting. I wanna dive into this a little bit more. Like, what kind of, I guess, we in the industry would call, like, objection handling, right? So
exactly.
what kind of training did you go well, what were the anticipated objections that they trained you for, and what were the how did you handle those? Okay, what was it?
It grew over time. I'll be candid with you. I would say my first year throughout 2020, um, we started hearing more and more about it. And then, you get your monthly numbers, your weekly numbers of your sales, you get your monthly, and then you get your quarterly. And there began a downward trend for myself and my territory. So I was constantly with my manager at the time, Mark Ratcliffe, in working together on handling these objections, and we're not only getting it from the training from the training department, but let's see. In January, we had a national sales meeting. In April, we had a national sales meeting. And in between those two national sales meetings, we had our district sales meetings. So at each of those sales meetings, it's we would talk as a group as to how to handle it. Then we started getting more and more over time, but it was slow. It took Purdue a long time to really even recognize that this was not an anomaly. This was something that was spreading, because what they would do is they would look at Steve and go, Steve, your numbers are terrible. You're going from the when you came here to the company, you were number 30 in your territory was number 30, and now you're number 60. A few months later, you're number 90. A few months later, you're 180. And eventually I was dead last in the company, you know?
Hmm.
So there was a lot of pressure personally on me at the time as to what kind of rep have they hired who's gone from top 30 to bottom rep in the country, while there were other parts of the country that were seeing massive growth, to the point that I think that at some point in, I don't remember exactly what year, or in 2020 or 2021, or which quarter it was, but there were reps in the country making over $200,000 a quarter, a
Wow.
quarter
Holy shit.
in,
A lot of money.
I mean, there's one rep, I think, in Myrtle Beach, and another one in New Orleans. I remember hearing about it. In one quarter, they made 100,000. Look what that, hooray, the next quarter, oh, we made 140,000. Next quarter, oh, look, they made 180,000. And if I remember correctly, I think the top number that I heard was 220,000 for a quarter.
Are you
So while the
are you just hearing these numbers from around the grapevine from other reps, or is this like promoted at some sort of con?
Oh, this is promoted. This is promoted through our district sales managers. I think in our regional breakouts that we would have, you would be here. They would tell you about it. I don't think that the company would say it at a regional manager, but hey, we would get the info from somebody, whether it was our district or or just through the grapevine. This is how much that they were making, but at the same time, you could also almost calculate it yourself. Where you see the numbers and you see your growth and you see their growth and you see how the company does their numbers and their rankings. You had a pretty good idea that there was a lot of people making a lot of money out there.
Why?
I could tell you this: 2 quarters into my time at Purdue, I was making zero commission, because my territory was one of the first ones, and also the other territories in southwestern, in our district. We were the first ones to really start seeing that downward trend,
So
and that's why.
so are
Okay,
you saying so sorry, I have to ask. So do you attribute why do you what do you attribute this decline in numbers to?
in my territory.
Sure.
Okay, so I would say a lot of it had to do with, in a period of about a year and a half since the time that I started, and I actually kept every one of these. The Roanoke Times by itself, which was my local newspaper, had at least 150 negative news articles about the product. You were hearing about it in the local TV as well. At the same time, I think it was in January or sometime in 2021, there was a magazine. It was Time Magazine came out with a cover article about Oxycontin, and once again, Pulaski, Virginia, a town in my territory, was featured in that article as being a hotbed of opioid, prescription abuse and diversion. So, so that contributes to a lot, because the doctors talk to each other. They're parts of health systems, and they're freaking out, going, "Hey, I'm not comfortable writing this product anymore. I'll write prescriptions of fentanyl,
So you really
Duragesic."
bought at the peak and you sold low, kind of.
I bought at the peak. I got in there at the peak of my territory, and I sold low. That is the truth.
Okay.
Um,
So shit. So okay, you start seeing all these newspaper clippings. I guess luckily LinkedIn wasn't as popular back in the day where people could just find out who works where. But are you starting to, I guess, receive any type of negative, uh, uh, I guess, consequences? I guess have you faced any negative consequences? Were people ever making remarks, or was it just shame in your head? I guess. What's kinda going on through your head there? What's going on?
not not completely, really. I mean, I would say it was in the summer of 2020. I just, the company didn't know that I was doing it, but I did let the company know that I was doing it. At some point in late 2020, early 21, the governor of Virginia was running for governor again. It was the attorney general was running for governor, and he had a big initiative as attorney general to weed out the prescription drug abuse and diversion. So he had a statewide, forget what they called it, but it was like a town hall that he hosted in my territory, and I went to it and learned a lot. And really, really, what came out of it for me was I'm thinking, okay, from my law enforcement background, how do we stop this from happening? At the same time, how do we really help people who have true pain issues? And so I remember walking into the sheriff's department at Pulaski, Virginia, introducing myself to them as the drug rep for Oxycontin. And it wasn't a big department, but when they invited me into their conference room to talk, it was like, I can't believe this guy is coming in here to talk. And looking back on it, I'm thinking, oh, who knows? I might have been under investigation at the time for something. But my whole purpose was to become a bridge and say, okay, how do we work together to bridge between what this company is doing, how the product is affecting the local market, and how can we continue to treat legitimate pain patients. So I ended up proposing to the company that they create a law enforcement liaison position, which they actually ended up doing. They hired a retired Virginia state police officer who was a drug interdiction task force member. He became a member of Purdue, and we were trying to, at the time, change our narrative so that we could still grow the product in a legitimate pain patient, and at the same time, try to stop as much as possible this diversion and abuse that was happening.
Man, if I were Purdue, if I were Richard Sackler, and I guess all this is going on, I would be like, "Yeah, we're gonna make some hires. We're gonna make some new hires. We're gonna straighten things out." And then I would just put all of those people in some remote building where they had their own network, they barely talk to people on the outside, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's a small price to pay to it's like a PR play for them, right?
I totally agree, and looking hindsight is 2020. I mean, I remember specifically. I don't remember exactly how many months or year, how long it took, but it was a long time from the time that I started and had that doctor tell me that a family member had died of an overdose to the time where the company goes, "Oh crap, we really do have a problem." There was a long time in between those two events. I had the pressure on me every day of, no, Steve's a bad rep. We got to fire him. I remember my manager, and I love Mark Ratcliffe as a friend, still do to this day. He goes, "Did I hire the wrong rep?" Because he's getting pressure from his boss. Why is your rep doing so bad? You know, um, and so
At
then
this time, are other people's territories are probably starting to see something similar too, right? Or
right, I think that when the Time magazine article came out and it really started hitting national news, I think that I think other territories started facing the problems as well. You know, and wherever you had the highest paid reps in the country was where the next problem was going to be, in my opinion.
So
you
that
know.
rep
So
before you was a fucking asshole, kind of, right? I mean,
what's
he's
that?
the rep before you. That guy slayed his territory, killed it, and then moved on, started selling whatever the next hot product was. Or you said he moved into like a new role, right?
He moved into a new role, a different division in the company, completely different product line. I guess you could look back and say that. I mean, you know,
I'm sure maybe he didn't know. I guess you were just saying that what that time you were with that other rep, that was the first time you heard about someone passing away. I guess was it the first time you heard about people abusing the drugs?
no, even when I was with the previous company, we knew that there was drug abuse, diversion issues in our part of the state. I mean, really,
Always
the
gonna be
demographics,
There's always gonna be abuse with those type of drugs, right? I mean,
right?
people are always gonna abuse those drugs, but I guess when did you first hear about people crushing the pills up to snort them? Because that seems
Oh, it's probably about the same time that I started with the company. I mean, the one once you hear it from that one doctor,
yeah.
then it's like you don't forget it, and you that's what you hear, and you start hearing it more and more, and more and more, and then you're reading the news articles. And I remember doctors, going into their office and go, "Hey, look, Steve, here's another article about your product." You know,
That must be an awkward conversation.
it was, and I can't tell you how many times I had the national sales rep of the year came and rode with me. I had one of the national training managers from corporate home office came and rode with me. I had high level people in the company come and ride with me to really see, is this problem really happening out here? And you know what? We would go and see the doctors that had the worst complaints,
Hmm.
and they would see it for themselves, but they were still slow to react.
Did they think it was Did they think it was, like, overblown? Like, they were overreacting? Or, like
Yeah, I think there was a lot of a feeling of that. Oh, people, the media is going to overreact. I mean, our local Roanoke Times blogger, he got a Pulitzer Prize for all of his Oxycontin coverage.
yeah.
So there was so much hype at the time, you know.
So, tell me about tell me about these events that I guess you guys used to invite doctors to these various events, marketing conferences, things like that, to to hear speakers, network, things like that.
Yeah, the company did. And typically the reps that would go and attend those events with the doctors, they were typically the reps who were in the top 10% of the company. So it was a pretty prestigious to be invited to attend one of those events. I was one of the worst in the country. Well, my territory ended up being one of the worst in the country, so I never got invited to those events. Where they brought the doctors in. But yeah, they had events. They had it in at resorts, in Central America and Mexico and the United States. They would bring doctors in. I remember at times, typically once or twice a year, they would say, "Hey, Steve, why don't you?" Well, and it was not just me; it was to all the reps. Pick out your top doctors that we can invite, and bring to the conference. So, whatever went on at those conferences, personally, I never got to see it. Would have loved to, but I didn't. It wasn't in the cards for me.
Is it like the movies or like I don't know if you've seen any of those TV shows. There's like a Netflix show and there's like a
Yeah,
Hulu show.
I've seen it, and it's painful to watch because, yes, there's some truth in it. And yes, there is some wonderful embellishment. You basically take the stories of maybe 10 or 15 reps and you pack it all into one person. So it seems like that was the life and times of Steve in Southwestern Virginia, because I think that I actually only watched 2 episodes and said, I can't watch it anymore because there was a level of, it was a good show, what I saw so far, but there was so much packaging of multiple types of situations into one character that, to me personally, having gone through it, became unbelievable. Even though a lot of elements were true from lots of different angles, for all of it to be true in one person was a stretch, you know?
Yeah, of course, they gotta embellish things a
That's
little
Hollywood.
bit, make yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So where were we? I think we are talking about the crash of the territory, um, the company not recognizing it.
We thought you wanna see this
Wherever we
you wanna see this cool little presentation I kinda put together to just,
showed
help us well,
me.
just I feel like we just need a little to have a little bit of fun in this conversation, you know? I mean, it's not
Mhm.
a serious conversation, we wanna hear all the whistleblower stuff, what kind of you know, what made you wanna whistleblow in the first place, right? And then etcetera, but, I wanted to have a little fun. I kinda started this whole thing. I kind of was working on my collage skills. Yeah, I think this is pretty well balanced, but, yeah, I threw some kids in there with some pills, etcetera. I was just having a little bit of fun with it, but do you have you ever taken Oxycontin before?
No, I have not.
Okay.
I have not taken it, so I have no idea what it feels like.
So I was curious. I didn't do it myself. I've always had a curiosity to try it, but after everything, after doing some research and preparation for this, I think I'll probably decline. But I have an addictive personality. I'll probably stick away from that. That being said, I was curious to know what OxyContin felt like, so I got on the internet and searched like anyone would, and one of the resources I used was Reddit. Are you familiar with Reddit?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So, someone on some Reddit user asked on some I don't even remember some forum what OxyContin felt like, and I thought I would share a couple answers with you. You ready?
Absolutely.
All right. This is the first response. It's like setting down 1,000 pounds of baggage that you never knew you and your soul were carrying. And then when you stop using, it's picking that weight back up again, plus a few extra pounds. That sounds, I mean, I don't know. I guess it sounds awesome at first. I can't really imagine what that feels like. But yeah, that was interesting. But the top answer to that thread was this one. Like your whole body is a dick being sucked, which I thought was quite hilarious by I love MDMA, which I thought that was great. You okay over there, Steve?
Yep, fine. Just got to me.
And then yeah, the third most liked comment of that thread was actually a comment beneath that, which I'll let you read. But you know what? I thought that was funny. Just a little insight into what the drug must feel like. So we can get back to my little presentation later, but I want to learn a little bit more about. So you're selling this drug, or you're not selling this drug. Everyone else is selling this drug. Um, what makes you what makes you wanna blow the whistle? Like, why put yourself in that position, I guess? I mean, I know you're a cop, but also at the same time, aren't you a little scared? These people have a lot of money. I'd be a little bit scared.
Well, it really stems from a couple of things. Number one, I left the company. I officially resigned January 1st, 2020, 2005. And so basically December of 2004 was my last time with the company. Went worked for another medical device company. I stayed within the medical device and the pharmaceutical industry for another few years. But at that point, I had moved on with life. It wasn't until Angela Ratcliffe reached out to me a few years later
Who is
and
she?
had told me, pardon?
Who is she?
She was my manager's wife.
Okay.
Angela, My manager was Mark Ratcliffe.
Right.
He was the one that hired me. And let's see, I resigned early in 2005. She called me. I actually can't remember the date or the year that she called me, but she called and told me about this case. And, did I remember ever promoting the drug? And specifically, did I ever promote the 2-to-1 conversion from Oxycontin or oxycodone to morphine? Do I did I remember promoting that to the doctors in my region? And I was like, oh yeah, I promoted that message all the time. Specifically at the VA medical centers or VA medical center. I just had one that I called on in my territory. So there was a specific message that we had because, as I told you earlier in the conversation, Purdue was losing its patent on MS Contin. So they had to protect that franchise, as they called it. So MS Contin was going to go away. So therefore, let's replace it with Oxycontin and let's really go out there and scavenge against our own product, is basically Purdue's philosophy. And so it was really easy to go out there and sell the fact that, according to one particular clinical study, that oxycodone had a 2-to-1 conversion with morphine. And that was a message that I remember specifically going out there and
Well, can
using
you dive into that?
specifically women.
What did you say? It
Pardon?
was a what did you say? 2 to 1 what?
2-to-1 conversion from oxycodone to morphine. So, um,
In strength?
uh,
Is that what you mean?
in strength, yeah,
Got it.
in strength. So, so basically, we would use that when we were trying to justify to a pharmacy director, let's say at a VA medical center, because this is where what my case is called a KETAM case, which is a false claims act. So I'm making, Angela Ratcliffe and I, and before us, Mark Ratcliffe, but we were making the case that the company had made a false claim. They had used a clinical study falsely to claim that there was a 2-to-1 conversion. But the problem was, and what came out, um, you know, and Mark Ratcliffe discovered it actually when a doctor told him about it, was the doctor stops him and says, you can't make that claim. You're making a claim that it's 2-to-1 conversion, but that is a single day, one dose study. Whereas you're taking oxycodone and morphine many times every day, twice a day, every day, for unlimited number of days. So therefore, there's this accumulation that occurs. And it's been what 20 years since I've talked about this, so I'm a little frosty on the science, but that accumulation therefore completely negates that 2-to-1 conversion. And really, when you take it over time, it's a 1-to-1 conversion. And the company was using that 2-to-1 conversion to make the articulation that it's actually less expensive, or just a little bit less expensive to prescribe Oxycontin than it is to prescribe this older MS Contin medication that was going off of patent. So it was kind of a bait and switch kind of thing that we were doing. And it was really at the essence of the success that Purdue had as a company, going out there and paying representatives a boatload of money. Because now, in theory, if you do the math, you can become twice as profitable than you would if you're able to say that it's a 2-to-1 conversion. And then all of a sudden, a couple of weeks later, a patient's telling a doctor, hey, that 10 millimeter, that 10 milligram tablet that you were prescribing to me is no longer working for me. Can you give me 20 milligrams? Well, now all of a sudden you're taking the same amount as you were before when you were taking MS Contin. So now because they've manipulated the price of the product, Purdue has just instantly become that much more profitable, you know, because now you're paying now it becomes a much more expensive drug, you know. And I think that it was through this manipulation of the pricing that allowed the company to um, to pay the reps the kind of commissions that they were paying, you know? And man, we probably had one of the most aggressive because of pay like this. I mean, who wouldn't be the most aggressive sales reps in the entire industry? So,
So I guess was there any kind of backlash from you, I guess? Well, I guess you're already out of the company, but I guess did you guess receive any type of email when people heard that you're speaking out about the company?
no, the way that these Ketam cases work is I'm bringing the case to the government attention on behalf of the government because it was the government. Excuse me.
So, obviously you're you're speaking out, I guess. Are you getting any type of backlash from former employees or anyone you work with previously, based on what you're
No, so when Angela contacted me about the case, I was like, yeah, I promoted the product on that. Do you remember specifically to whom you promoted the product? And I promoted the product that way to lots of doctors and lots of pharmacy and lots of hospital pharmacies because the hospital pharmacy would purchase through a completely different channel than your retail pharmacy. And specifically, my part of the case was that I was promoting this to the Veterans Administration Hospital. So that's really becomes a federal government. Here we're telling the federal government, hey, we're telling a pharmacist within the federal government, hey, this is a 2-to-1 conversion of this product, when in reality it's not. And so there's the fraud. But at the time that we're promoting this, and even Mark Radcliffe at the time when he first was confronted about it, um, you know, no, we didn't know that this was a fraudulent claim that we were making, as a drug rep for the company. So it's a little surprising to us. But Angela asked me if I knew what I was had done it, and yeah, I remember doing it. So ended up, she and I brought the case against Purdue. So we basically bring it to the federal government, and I don't know the ins and outs of how the legal system works, what my lawyer was doing and communicating with the government lawyers, but we brought it to their attention. And then for a period of time, this stays completely silent. I can't talk to anyone about it, no one about it outside of my lawyer, Angela, and the government. So that's what happens with these types of cases. And as a whistleblower, that's what happened in this case. So, it goes through the process where the where they try to dismiss it, and then they try to dismiss it again through the legal process. And the thing about it was Angela was able to come to me with the case because her husband, Mark Radcliffe, my manager, had brought the case to the government a few years earlier, which I had no idea that had even gone on, just to give you an idea of how secret it was. But his case was dismissed. And if I remember correctly, I might be wrong about some details. His case was dismissed because when he left the company, he signed a covenant not to sue or some type of a non-disclosure agreement, and therefore the company was able to successfully use that to have his case dismissed. You know, so we were able to bring it between Angela and I. We were able to bring it, and they tried to dismiss it again. We appealed to the Fourth Circuit, um, and then we prevailed at the Fourth Circuit, and
how long
the
did all this
company.
take? I guess how long are you going back and forth for?
Couple of years. Yeah, it takes a couple of years for the process to work itself out. Before this call, I probably should have looked at the years when all of this happened, but it's out there. I mean, you go to SCOTUS blog, you can see the exact train, continuum of time of how this case went about. So it was dismissed. We appealed to the Fourth Circuit. We prevailed at the Fourth Circuit. The company appeals to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court basically says that the Fourth Circuit decision is sufficient. Take it back to trial. So this is where the fun part starts. Well, it wasn't too long after that we started going through discovery, and that's when the company has to, by court order, disclose to us all of the documents that they have relating to this false claim that they had made. about the product. And that's where, they would send us, microfiches of thumb. I actually have one here, one of those thumbnails, of a drive, a flash drive. And we would go through it, and it would have hundreds of thousands of documents on it, both the text document of what was said on that image and then the image of the document. So I spent weeks and weeks and months reading emails of the company executives, um, where they were going back and forth within themselves, within training department. I got to read things that they said about me in that, so I know for a fact that they didn't think too highly of
What
my
did they
sales
say about
skills
you?
at one point, because my territory had been tanking. But at the same
What did
time,
they say about you specifically? Are you able to just
uh, I'll just say that they had concerns that they didn't hire an effective rep that was able to overcome the objections of the doctors, about the abuse and diversion of the drug, and that I'm spending too much time focusing on that when I should be focusing on legitimate pain patients. So I'm telling you, there was a lot of pressure, and I got to see, how my manager, not Mark, but above him, what was being said about me. But at the same time, I also got to read emails between Purdue's chief medical officer and let's say the equivalent of, and it's been years since I read it, but it's like the equivalent of your FDA administrator, but in Japan, you know, and they were questioning. Yeah, and this is what also came out in Discovery, was reading how many doctors out there had questioned the legitimacy of these false claims that they were making, you know, which I contended were false claims. So not only did that doctor say to
remember
Mark
what you were
Ratcliffe,
saying specifically? I mean, I guess
pardon?
do you remember what those messages were specifically?
Um, it's been years since I've read those. It was only during Discovery that I read it, and then after the case was ultimately dismissed, I had to destroy everything that I had. So, but it was things such as, the company is making a claim to that foreign, um, FDA of the country of Japan, whatever they call their organization. They're making this claim that there's this 2-to-1 conversion, and they're being called out on it, basically, to say you can't make this. This is a single dose, 1-day trial. Therefore, you cannot make that claim that it's a 2-to-1 conversion if the patients are going to be taking this product over and over long periods of time. So, and I remember specifically, because we were going to bring this up during trial, was, the company executives, man, I wish I had a photographic memory, but, the company executives saying, this is our franchise, this is our $2 billion product, we have to do everything we can to protect this 2-to-1 conversion, in essence, not verbatim, but, the essence of the message. So there was a lot within my case that came out in Discovery, which we were going to put to trial, that would have not only substantiated the fact that the company knew that they had committed this fraud, um, but I believe the FDA also knew that it was fraud, and they also they were willing to overlook it. Why? Well, these pharmaceutical companies put a lot of money into the FDA, and some of these FDA administrators end up working specifically for the pharmaceutical companies that they help approve the product for. And specifically, the guy that worked at the FDA ends up at Purdue Pharma, you know?
Curtis Wright,
So,
right? Is that
pardon?
Curtis Wright? Is that the guy's name?
I don't remember his name. No, I mean, it could be. I just don't remember
This
personally.
is the guy that like approved the FDA inserts, right?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
I'd let
that
you
guy
guys go back
got put on payroll,
and
and I think his salary, if I'm not mistaken, was somewhere close of just south of like $400,000 a year back then.
I'm not surprised. Yeah.
You know, nice, pretty
From somebody that was coming from a government job that probably at the time wasn't making much more than 110 or 120 grand, probably,
I think
you know?
everyone it's fucked up to say, but I think everyone has, like, a price. Will you
Mhm.
just sell out your fellow man just to protect you and your family? I guess, right? It's like
Oh yeah.
I don't know. It's dark. I guess it's sinister, but
But
yeah.
I mean, I'll so our case was dismissed right before, within days of being able to depose Richard Sackler, um, Michael Friedman, Jim Merle. I think it was Jim Merlot. He was the VP of training. Might have butchered that name, but we had a whole list um, of Purdue executives that we were going to depose at the time that would that we had some very specific questions about their emails, and we were going to be able to point out, not only did you know that you were committing fraud, the FDA knew that you were committing fraud.
Yeah, it's pretty sad. Um, obviously, I'm sure you're obviously keeping up with the trial, but what was it recently that they agreed to? Something like $6 billion in settlements?
Yeah, I mean there was that. There's been a number of settlements over the years. I mean, if I remember correctly, Michael Friedman and the medical officer were both convicted criminally for the way that they marketed the product, and that happened in Abingdon, Virginia, which was just about 20 miles outside of my territory. Um, so the company went through a lot, and in actuality, after my case was dismissed, it wasn't maybe a year after that when the big case, I think out of Massachusetts or New Hampshire, there was a major settlement that Purdue had with the government. And at the time, I just shook my head. They did not want me and Angela to be the winners of this case, and I think that there was my humble opinion, me personally thinking here, I think that not only did we have the company working against us, I would say that we also had members of the Department of Justice and perhaps even the court that were working against us and did not want this particular case to succeed because they had other cases that were more favorable towards states or what have you. Even though not only was my case on behalf of the federal government being defrauded, it was also on behalf of, I think, 26 states that were also defrauded by Purdue. So, um, looking back on it, was quite frustrating. Looking back even further in my experience in this, I do have a lot of regrets staying with the company as long as I did, and continuing to think that this was a salvageable situation. But I get pretty passionate about what I'm involved with, and some skeptic, or somebody cynical out there can say, oh well, you apparently had a price too. Um, yeah, it was the price of me basically staying in a bad situation for too long. And when I say a bad situation, it was no, not recognize when having the pressure of the company just saying, what are you doing here? Why are you such a bad rep? And I did have a desire to turn my territory around and do better. Um, Ultimately, we see what came of the company. It wasn't like in 2004 they had their first round of layoffs. I think a year later they had another round of layoffs. So the company ultimately became a shell of what it once was. But unfortunately, guess what? The product's still in the market. It's still harming people, and that whole class of products is still in the market. So I contend, and I think that we would have been able to demonstrate this in court, that had Purdue not made this false claim of a 2-to-1 conversion and used that with other claims about their product, I don't think that this product should have ever been approved in the first place. You know,
Yeah.
but the FDA did it. And if this product had not been approved, we would not have had the most aggressive sales force in the industry going out there being paid the highest commissions in the industry. And I don't have a problem with people getting paid money. I want to make money. And I think we all in the capitalist society want to make money as well. But they were able to manipulate the data to the point where this product was responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. And it created the opioid crisis. And I would say that the opioid crisis started with a false claim that it's twice as potent as morphine. Therefore, we can manipulate, how we charge for the product. Therefore, when it turns out that it's not twice as potent, it's 1 to 1, I can go out there and make a much bigger buck, the company says to themselves, off of this product. And I can pay these people high amounts of money to get them motivated to go out there and make it happen. And I think that ultimately all of these events together led to the beginning of this is where the opioid crisis started. And it still hasn't gone away, and we're still talking about it. And it's global now.
Yeah, no, just driving around downtown, like, you can't help but see it, right? Have you ever heard of Skid Row before?
Oh yeah, I've driven by there once in my life, just to drive by and see what it's like. It's a tragedy.
Once is enough. I don't think you
Yeah,
need to see it again. Yeah, it's pretty sad, right? For those that know, Skid Row is like a big area in LA. It's probably, I don't know. At this point, it's probably 3 blocks wide, 3 blocks in length, something like that. I don't know. It's a massive area, but it's just lined with tents and people on the side of the streets, and it's a mix of things. I mean, like I said, homeless isn't just drug addiction. It's mental health. There's a lot of reasons why people are homeless. You can even say some of it's due to housing costs, but a lot of it is due to this addiction problem that we're having, which is, it's it's sad. Everyone seems to be addicted. Everyone seems to be on something nowadays.
yeah,
I think nowadays it seems like everyone has ADHD, or something. If it's everyone has anxiety, and they're always taking some sort of pill. And it's funny. I was doing some research on this, and it seems like Arthur Sackler, I think is his name, one of the brothers that founded Purdue Pharma. Apparently, apparently he made a lot of his money in like advertising. Actually, like even though he was a doctor, he made a lot of his money in advertising. But apparently he's in the like medical advertising hall of fame or something like
not
pharmaceutical
surprised.
advertising hall of I didn't even know something like that existed. It's kind of crazy to think something that like that does exist. I'd be curious to kind of go through that list and see how everyone on that list has contributed to where we are today. Do you ever feel guilt about any of this? Like I gotta
I
ask you.
well,
It's just like obviously, like I don't know. I guess if it wasn't such a long part of my career history, I would almost feel compelled to leave it off of my resume.
well, it's funny you say that. Yeah, I do feel guilt. I regret. Um, I regret buying into the propaganda of that we were trying to resolve pain. Now, granted, I think that there were people that got the pain relief,
Yeah, I think
but
a lot
man,
of
I think
people in watching a lot of stuff, it sucks for a lot of people that want to believe that there is something
mhm,
better, right? That are actually
yeah,
in it for the care and want to help people, and they kind of get duped by false marketing practices. They say this is better, right? I mean, if
mhm,
FDA says something, then I think it's fair that you kind of trust that, right? It's just like we trust the CDC to say, well, whatever, right about whatever. So you trust those entities to have your best interest, and often case, not maybe not often case, but seemingly a lot of the times, many times they don't, right? Or someone just someone fucks you. There's always someone,
yeah,
right? That
yep.
there's always someone that you get to. So
So yeah, I do regret it. I look back, wish I had left a lot sooner than I did. Um, and but like I said, I thought that for a time that I was trying to actually improve things. Now then I become a whistleblower. I don't think having Purdue on my resume is as bad as being a whistleblower. That's the worst thing on my resume. Even though I sit here and when I talk to people casually, and they hear that I was a whistleblower and I start telling them what I blew the whistle on, they're like, "Oh, good for you, man. You're a hero." I'm like, "Yeah." But when I go out there to apply for a traditional job through human resources departments and they see the first thing up there that says that Steve May was a federal whistleblower against his employer, no, I don't think I want to deal with that guy.
I guess a
At the
risk.
same time, yeah, as a risk, right? And at the same time, I go, no, 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 really, listen to me. And I've started, several companies since then in the last 10 years, and and I take what I've learned from that experience and go, okay, when I'm going to make this new product that I'm making, through my company, I'm going to make sure that I don't make a claim that can't be substantiated, you know, 6 ways from Sunday.
But that's
So
so
I'm
tough.
a bulldog
I mean,
about that now.
they owned, like, it's like they had the entire supply chain, you know what I mean? It's like they
Hmm.
paid doctors, they had publications, they had,
Hmm.
it's like, if they own the information, then what the hell are you gonna do? It's so hard to discern. It it was almost like fake news, I feel like is always attributed to Donald Trump, right? Because he, like, kind of
Hmm.
popularized that, but I don't know. I guess, like, we're false advertising, I guess this has been around for a long time. I don't know. I guess this is maybe just maybe most prominent case of false advertising because we can't help but see, like, the effects of it every day, right?
Well, I'll say this. Um, I think there's a bigger case that's very similar to mine, that we're going to hear about over the coming months and years, and that's the Brooks Jackson case against Pfizer right now, which is being brought on basically a very similar um, concept in the sense that, like Purdue, who used a clinical study to make a fraudulent false claim, Pfizer used a clinical study fraudulently to make a false claim about the safety and efficacy of their vaccines. You know, so I think that case right there is probably going to make the opioid crisis, Oxycontin cases look small.
Really interesting.
It's because I think that, whereas Oxycontin has probably killed, let's say, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. I don't think that gets into the millions. I think we're going to find out that the false claims that have happened, with the vaccines are going to end up killing tens of millions. So that's me
Yeah.
thinking about that. But it's a very similar case in concept. How a pharmaceutical company can take a product, make a false claim about it using a clinical study, throw the wool over everybody's eyes, and nobody sees the truth behind that deception.
Yeah. I fuck it, man. I always have trepidation in talking about shit like this because it's so early in my podcasting career, right? Like, if I had been established, right, and I had a following, that obviously gives me a little bit of leverage and a little bit of comfort to be like, yeah, fuck you, I'll say whatever I want. This is what? This is gonna be like the fourth one I'm publishing. So, like, maybe this is a little bit too early, but totally agree with you. I'm just gonna say, like, look, do I believe in vaccines? Yeah, absolutely. Do I think they work? Yeah, sure. But do I think that it could have been rushed? Sure, absolutely. Do I know anything about what you're talking about? No, I don't know about this case. I'm very curious to learn about it as it comes out. But there are a lot of people saying, oh, they're pharmaceutical companies. There's no way they would risk something like that. Look, who knows? Everyone look, I don't know. I believe in some conspiracies, right? I won't say all of
Hmm.
them, but some of them I believe should be investigated. And yeah, I don't immediately think that people are crazy for saying something like that is plausible. So I'm curious
Well, I could
how this all
I
plays
could
out.
tell you, as a whistleblower who's gone through discovery, because that's huge. And I wish I had the opportunity to express the discovery that we found to the court. I know, I've seen it. I've read the emails where the company knew. And I will say, I can't say this, that I saw where the FDA says, "Oh yeah, we know this is false, but we're still going to prove it anyway." I never found that smoking gun, but I believe that at the same time that Purdue is trying to get this product approved in the United States, they're also getting pushback in the same time frame from the FDA of Japan and other countries on the principle of the concept that they're lying about. I mean, call it a conspiracy theory, but but at some point you can actually say, no, I've read the email. The Japanese knew that this was a false claim. Hundreds of doctors and experts knew that this was a false claim. How did the FDA not know that this was a false claim? And now, 24 years later, or actually almost 30 years after Oxycontin was approved, we see a very similar thing happen with the Brooks Jackson case. I mean, I think that we are just opening the Pandora's box of the fraud that has been committed against against humanity.
It sucks too is that here I'll actually just pull this up. But, the repercussions for doing something like this seemingly are just slaps on the wrist. They're like speeding ticket
Yeah,
to these folks.
yeah,
I don't remember exactly. This is a reputable company that I pulled this from. I don't remember. Maybe it was the New Yorker. Who knows? But I thought this was really interesting. Agreeing to like something like a $6 billion payout, they would be not held liable for any type of civil penalties or something like that by agreeing to something like that. I think this case is ongoing, but essentially they've agreed to do some sort of payout around $6 billion. Even
isn't that
though
convenient?
yeah, even though they're worth roughly 11. I kind of I did the math, just for fun. Yeah, I did the math and I saw that number, the total interest number, $506 million. Uh, and I was like, "Wait, that can't
Billion.
be right." And then, I was like, "Wait, that is right." And, this would just be like an idiot like me. Like, if I had $11 billion and I just put it in a high yield savings account like I have right now, and, that would be like an idiot, right? These people don't do that. These people have investments. They buy shit with their money. They don't just put it in a savings account. But if they just did put it in a savings account, this is how much money they would make each year. So yeah, I'm curious. They have this whole agreement to this $6 billion payout, but is that even upfront, or is that like, hey, we'll pay the $6 billion out over the course of 10, 20 years, and hey, look, our interest is more than we're paying out each year, so really it's no harm no foul.
Well, if if you don't have any other questions, I'd love if you have any other questions, let me know. But um, I hope for everybody watching and listening to this, I hope that it's been valuable information. I really hope that your takeaway is, um, man, try to think of myself as a pretty smart guy sometimes, but hey, I got duped by Purdue. I bought it, and so did hundreds and hundreds and thousands of other doctors bought bought the propaganda. And I will say this till my last day, that I believe that this case would have been able to prove, if we had been allowed to take it all the way through trial, we would have been able to prove that this was where the opioid crisis started. Had they not made this false claim, they probably would not have gotten the drug approved.
Well, luckily, I think people are starting to find out the truth, and hopefully, with your whistleblower podcast coming out, even more people will know that. So, thank you
Yeah,
so much for your time. Really loved having you on the show. Um, you got to let me know when this podcast comes out so that so I can give it a shout out.
absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Appreciate it.